Ready? Right. Good morning, everybody. If you just be kind enough to just take your seats. I hope you all enjoyed the dinner last night. I think it just shows the pulling power of the CCN that we had the next President of the United States join us for dinner. Right, so we've got some excellent sessions this morning, and starting with Baroness Sharon Taylor. So, well, all of you will know Sharon anyway, but I did have a little look on Wikipedia this morning just to see, and what I didn't know was that you have had a long career with John Lewis, British Aerospace, and head of the executive support at Hertfordshire Constabulary, whilst also being an elected member from 1997, borough councillor for Stevenage, and of course the leader from 2006 to 2022, and Hertfordshire County Council from 2008 until 2024. And Sharon was just saying that she had to step down as a county councillor when she took on the ministerial job, which was very much welcomed by all of those in Stevenage for yet another by-election, so shortly after the general election. Anyway, and then was, of course, elevated to the Lords in 2022 and is now a minister at MHCLG. I think Sharon's following me around because last week we were also speaking at a conference around the Developers Forum, which was really interesting actually to kind of hear their views on the proposed MPPF and so on. Anyway, we're delighted to have Sharon here today, and I think as soon as the last people sit down, Sharon, I'll hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tim, for that very kind introduction. And it's a great privilege to be here today representing the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, and to see some very familiar faces in the audience. Now, I'm very aware that I am competing with Rory Bremner, who you had last night. I'm not going to pretend I can do all those voices, but hopefully I can give you some idea of the direction of travel of the government. My colleague Jim McMahon, the Local Government Minister, is very sorry he can't be with you today, and he does send his apologies. Like Jim, my background is local government, as you've heard from Councillor Oliver, serving as leader of Stevenage Council and as a county councillor from 2008 until July this year. As such, I have seen firsthand the absolutely key role of county councils in delivering services that are so vital to our communities. And I do know, I was the finance spokesperson for the Labour group at County Council for a very long time, so I know just how tough that has been in recent years. I want to start by thanking the many dedicated public servants, not just those in this room, but across the whole County Council sector. You and your officers have kept some of our most critical public services running during some extremely challenging times. And to see what county councils did during COVID, both from the resilience perspective, but also delivering for the most vulnerable in our communities. You kept going, you did what was necessary for our communities, and all credit to you for that. I want to assure you that the work you do is recognised in government. Your local knowledge and expertise is absolutely respected. We want to ensure that it's harnessed as we work together to address the many challenges that our country faces. Many of you have heard the Deputy Prime Minister at the LGA conference, and I wanted to reiterate again that this government is clear in our commitment to resetting the relationship with local government and rebuilding its foundations as part of a partnership based on honesty and respect. At the LGA conference, I also attended the launch of the Leaders' Council, an important landmark in our relationship reset. This council will bring together local government leaders and ministers to tackle the shared problems and deliver for the communities that ultimately we all serve. As well as giving the sector a voice at the heart of government, the Leaders' Council will be critical for co-designing policy at the highest levels. And I'm very pleased that Councillor Oliver, Chair of the CCN, is part of the Leaders' Council, I know he will continue to provide a strong voice for counties and members of the CCN. As I said, we are set on rebuilding the foundations of local government, and I want to use the time I have today to talk more about the English Devolution White Paper, which we discussed at the last Leaders' Council, and the local government funding landscape, which I know is a matter of great concern to all of you here today. Devolution is critical to delivering this government's mission to drive growth and to improve public services. At the moment, power is too centralised in Westminster, meaning that local leaders lack the tools to deliver for our people. The government set itself 5 key missions, and we can't do that without widespread devolution. That's why we're bringing forward a landmark English Devolution Bill, which will deliver on our commitment to transfer power out of Westminster. The bill will make devolution the default setting, making it easier to establish new authorities and devolve further power to existing ones. In advance of this, we will publish a white paper setting out our vision, and the white paper will set out plans for the bill and the vision for devolution, and this comprises of 3 main components. Firstly, strong communities empowered to make their places great. Secondly, local authorities on the road to recovery and reform with strong foundations to build on. And thirdly, empowered mayors and combined authorities with a seat at the table of the Council of Nations and Regions and access to a new framework of powers over house building and planning, transport and skills. The white paper will set out our plans to both extend and deepen devolution. So on extending devolution, in July, the Deputy Prime Minister invited places without a devolution agreement to work with neighbours and come forward with proposals over sensible geographies for their areas. As you all know, this process closed in September, and the government will engage closely with local leaders and stakeholders to review the proposals that we've received. The government believes that the benefits of devolution are best achieved through the establishment of mayoral combined authorities or combined county authorities. Non-mayoral devolution can, however, be an important foundational step for areas to see early benefits from devolution in the short term. Therefore, a mayor will not be a prerequisite for a new devolution deal. However, some powers will be reserved for institutions with elected leaders. On deepening devolution, we've already seen the impact that combined authorities can have, particularly as champions for growth in their area. However, we recognise that more needs to be done, and we have asked mayors to develop ambitious local growth plans for their areas. And to support these, we will devolve new powers over the levers of growth, including on housing, planning, transport and skills. We will provide integrated funding settlements for mayoral combined authorities that can demonstrate an exemplary management of public money. At the recent budget, we confirmed a further 4 areas would benefit from these, and we published transparent criteria for how other places can become eligible. We recognise that the success of devolution will not be down to mayors and combined authorities alone. That's why we need to fix the foundations, enabling local authorities to deliver high-quality services and lead their places through a genuine partnership with local government. We've heard from many councils that local government reorganisation, including creating unitary councils of the right size, can be a way to deliver efficiency savings and increase the sustainability and resilience of local government. As confirmed at the recent budget, we will set out in the upcoming English Devolution White Paper our plans for working in partnership with councils to move to simpler structures that make sense for local areas. I now turn to what the budget has set out for local government funding and the long-awaited reform of the local government funding landscape. We recognise the challenges that local authorities are facing, and I know, because I see it every day, that your demand is increasing for critical services, and we've listened to voices across the sector and have prioritised local government at this budget. We've announced £1.3 billion of new grant funding in 25-26 for local government to deliver core services, of which at least 600 million is for social care. Together with local income from council tax and locally retained business rates, this provides a real terms increase in total core spending power of around 3.2%. Now, I know that the situation is still difficult, that I don't underestimate that at all. In addition, local government in England is expected to receive around 1.1 billion of new funding in 25-26 through the implementation of the Extended Producer Responsibility for Packaging scheme. This is alongside further spending commitments, including 640 million in the bus service improvement plans funding to support those locally led initiatives to improve local bus services, such as service support, fares initiatives and capital schemes. And then 233 million in additional resource funding for homelessness pressures, taking total homelessness spending to nearly £1 billion in 25-26. And then £1 billion to extend the Household Support Fund in England and discretionary housing payments in England and Wales in 25-26. That was vital because the Household Support Fund money actually ran out in September. We've had to provide that until the end of this year and then guarantee the spending for next year. My experience in local government showed me over and again the stark reality of the battle that parents of children with special educational needs had to get what their children need, and the damage caused to those children's aspirations and potential when this took too long. I also saw that the pressure that increased demand placed on budgets. So I'm pleased that this government is providing £1 billion increase to special educational needs and disabilities and alternative provision funding, equivalent to 6% real growth. This is an important step in realising our government's vision to reform England's SEND provision, to build an inclusive system that delivers better outcomes for all and is financially sustainable. The government will work closely in partnership with parents, teachers and local authorities to take forward this work. In phase 2 of the spending review, we will continue with what we've started here. We want to build on the investment in children's social care and set out plans for fundamental reform of the system. And on temporary accommodation, we will work as part of the cross-government task force to address homelessness and rough sleeping. Altogether, this 1.3 billion will help councils to deliver essential services, alongside significant further investment to ease the pressures you face in areas like special educational needs and road maintenance, and demonstrates clearly how this government is prioritising local government. You all know how difficult the fiscal position was this year, and it's been clear to us that we needed to give priority to local government. The government is committed to pursuing a comprehensive set of reforms for public services to return the local government sector to a sustainable position. This will be done in partnership with local government and on the principle of giving forward notice and certainty to allow time for councils to plan. Rising service pressures in key areas, we all know, are putting an unsustainable burden on councils. The funding landscape is out of date, and deep-rooted uncertainty has limited the ability for councils to plan for the future. After years of delaying much-needed fair funding reform, we will update and improve the approach to funding allocations within the local government finance settlement by redistributing funding to ensure that it reflects an up-to-date assessment of need and local resources. This will be a long-term programme of recovery and reform. It will start with a deprivation-based approach in 25-26, with additional funding targeted to the places that need it most. Broader redistribution of funding will follow through multi-year settlements from 26-27, and this will provide the long-term certainty and enable local government to focus on its priorities, delivering for residents and providing the vital frontline services that people rely on every day. We recognise this will still be difficult for the sector, but it's time for local government to take the decisions it needs to begin to transform services and embark on the process of reducing costs and improving delivery. Now, again, I'm only too aware from my time in local government that some of the processes for funding bids seemed to only reward those with the resources to bid and not those where the need was the greatest. That can't carry on. So to reduce burdens on the sector, we will end the time-consuming competitive bidding processes for government grants and cut reporting requirements, allowing local authorities to focus on delivering for their residents. We will also reduce the number of grants and consolidate them into the local government finance settlement wherever possible, giving local government greater freedom to determine and deliver their own priorities. We know the sector values as much early certainty as possible, so we'll be publishing a policy statement later this month where we'll set out our intentions for these reforms of the local government finance system. The provisional local government finance settlement for 25-26 will of course come forward in the usual way towards the end of the year. Now I remember the days when this would come out on Christmas Eve, so not too close to the end of the year I hope. I remember it only too well. And we'll consult ahead of the publication of the final settlement in the new year. So whether it's our landmark devolution bill that will transfer powers out of Whitehall or backing you with the long-term funding and certainty that you need, we are confident that local government can once again be strong, build on firm foundations and continue to serve the communities you represent and deliver the public services that people can rely on. I know the coming years won't always be easy, but we're a government of service that is on your side. Working in partnership, we want to fix the basics so you can focus on the things that really matter to your communities. So can I thank you all once again for everything you do in your communities. I see it on a daily basis. I'm really proud of local government and the way it's responded to the challenges of the last few years, and I look forward to continue working with you in my new role. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sharon. Right, some hands up already. So we got a roving mic somewhere. Well, no, if you start at the other side over there, please, at the back. There are two hands that are up there.
Can they say their names?
Yeah, if you can just say who you are, where you're from.
Good morning. Councillor Julian German, Cornwall Council, but also CCN's rural spokesperson. Thanks very much, Baroness Taylor, for your words. You mentioned a reframing in terms of deprivation. Please, can you also guarantee that rurality will be taken into account in that formula? Thank you.
We'll take the next question as well.
Richard Smith, Deputy Leader at Suffolk County Council. Minister, what you said about unitary government, I think will be welcome news to many people in this room. And I think we would like to benefit from it in Suffolk, and our leader is meeting the Minister tomorrow. Can you tell me, you said you're in favour of unitary government of a certain size. Can you give us some indication of what you mean by what will be that certain size?
Okay, do you want me to take those two first? First of all, on the point about rurality, absolutely, yes, we're very aware of the many challenges that rural areas face. Obviously, I look after housing and planning, so I see the issues around housing, but there are many issues around the economy as well in rural areas, and other challenges like environmental challenges like flooding, like broadband, many issues. So yes, we will be looking very closely at those as we develop our new funding formulas, and do contribute to the consultation when it's published. We'd love to hear from you as the rural spokesperson. Do get in touch with us and give us some feedback on that, because it's very important we keep that dialogue going between us. On the issues around size, I don't think we're going to be very specific about a number. However, there are critical factors around making sure that this works effectively and delivers both the efficiencies we need, but also the level of service that we're going to need going forward, and enables those authorities to focus in their combined authorities on growth for their areas. So we're open to discussions on the size of both unitaries and combined authorities, but always with that eye to the main purpose of this being delivering better services, growth in the economy, and effective and efficient delivery of local government services. So you may be disappointed, I'm not going to give you a number today, but we're looking at all proposals, and I think as long as they come forward with those three elements in mind, we'll be open to discussions.
Okay, if we take Martin and then Richard Roberts at the back there.
Thank you. Martin Tate, I'm leader of Buckinghamshire Council. Like about half the other councils now in the CCN, we are a unitary council. That means we already have powers over strategic housing, strategic transport, economic development. Maybe you could just tell us what it is specifically that central government will be devolving that will make devolution effective and attractive. And can you guarantee that the funding will also come with whatever is devolved, both this year and every year going forward?
We'll take Richard as well. I suspect that might be on the same theme.
Good morning, Sharon. Thank you so much for coming here.
Morning, Leader.
Richard Roberts, leader of Hertfordshire. Respect the Taylor. A question. The talk of redistribution makes the South ever so slightly nervous that it might be heading north. Are you thinking of a mechanism whereby the South has a flexibility around its fundraising that may not be available up north, but with our demand pressures from our large populations, unless we have some means of backfilling, that redistribution could be quite problematic? Thank you.
Great questions. Thank you, Martin and Richard. Martin, I think this is one of the most exciting parts of the government's agenda. We've set up under the Cabinet Office a cross-government working group because when I first went into the House of Lords, it was astonishing to me that although I was shadow minister for, it was DLUC in those days, the issues that I was dealing with as a county councillor, so adult social care and children's SEND care, didn't come in my portfolio at all. They sat in completely different departments, one in health and one in education. So we've got to get better at working across departments. And similarly, when we devolve those services, when we devolve things relating to those services, the funding and the powers have to go together with that. That will depend on being confident that there is the right level of accountability in local areas for government departments to be convinced that devolution is the right way to go. And I think that's the important thing here, that in order to make devolution work, there have to be the accountability structures in place. So first of all, they've got to be democratic, but they've also got to be accountable to the people that use those services so that we can persuade government departments that the right thing to do is devolve. But devolution will be the default setting for this government. I'm not in any doubt about that. So there will be a sort of system of subsidiarity, if you like. So anything that can be devolved will be, depending on the structures that are there to receive those powers and funding. I hope that's clear. But we will be, when you see the English devolution white paper, which will be coming out shortly, have a look at it. If you've got any further issues to raise on that, please do come back and let us know. If you've got any thoughts on it at all, we'd love to hear from you. Richard, you will know I've had a long-standing issue around two black and white vision of what redistribution means, because there are areas, whatever part of the country you're in, there are areas that are more deprived and areas that are better off. And I think we have to be very careful about having too blunt instrument approach to this. What I would say is that if there are flexibilities around fundraising that authorities need, particularly if you've put in a bid for a devolution deal or a reorganisation process, please come forward with those ideas for flexibilities that you think might work in your area, because we are very much in listening mode and we'd like to hear about those as we go forward. I can't guarantee that the ministers will agree them. We have to get these agreed with Treasury and everybody else, but we're very open to ideas about how to make that work in areas that might not naturally be seen as areas that needed more support from government.
Okay, Amanda at the back there, please. I mean, I think the assessment of need absolutely needs to be more than just looking at deprivation. It has to look at, you know, the
Well,
demand.
rurality is a good example of that, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim. Amanda Hopgood, leader of Durham County Council. So I'm going to speak up for the North after the last comment. So I represent a rural county that's 70% rural and gets no rural funding. We have a basis of raising money on council tax. Our council tax doesn't cover the pay increase that is agreed nationally. So when it comes to fairness and deprivation, we pay for 85% of everybody in a care home is paid for by Durham County Council. So whilst I welcome all the funding that's been agreed and awarded last week, it doesn't even cover 50% of the increase that's gone up this year and what's been announced in terms of national insurance, etc., for that sector. So when it comes to making sure we have a fair deal, it needs to be fair for everyone. And this country exists way beyond the M62. It exists way beyond Watford Gap. But there is a big bit between the M62 and the Scottish borders. So I welcome the government's looking at this and making sure that fairness is well distributed. Thank you.
Richard? There we go. Put your hand up a bit.
Thank you.
Okay.
Richard Wilkins, Somerset Council. With the difference between the combined authority with and without a mayor, could you just flesh that out a bit so that we understand what the financial differences will be?
Okay, so Amanda, absolutely understand why you're making the case for Durham. It was right to do the things we did in the Employment Rights Act and to change the national living wage. And I understand that puts pressure on our councils. That's the whole review of local government funding is based on making it a fairer system. And please be assured that, you know, obviously you'll know our Deputy Prime Minister comes from the North, the Minister for Local Government comes from the North. But my point was really about making sure we don't have too blunt an instrument here and recognise that deprivation exists in other parts as well. But your point is very well made and understood. And as we do the review to fair funding, that's very much in our sights. So I hope that reassures you that we do have all of those issues. Rurality is one of them, but as is the, you know, the issues of the inequalities and council tax. You know, I've seen this. We've talked about this for, you know, all the time. I've been involved in local government for over 30 years now. And all the time I've been involved with local government, we've talked about how unfair council tax is in terms of, you know, the areas that need it the most are the least able to raise additional funds. So we're very aware of that, and we will be working to try and make that system work better for the people that we serve. Richard, I think the point I was trying to make is that we have a vision about democratic accountability for funding. So if we're going to devolve more funding from government departments and from government generally, from Whitehall, there needs to be the level of accountability at local level that would reassure people that they've got some say in how that money's spent. Now, you're all, some of you are councillors here, so you have your own democratic accountability. But when we look at that in terms of bigger areas and the growth picture, we feel that mayors are the best way of making sure we've got that democratic accountability across a larger area for the money that's going to be devolved in terms of skills and funding for that normally would have been spent in Westminster. So that's what we're saying, that you will be able to put forward devolution deals that don't include a mayor, but the biggest funding and powers will come from deals that do have a mayor, because that gives the democratic accountability.
Okay, we'll take two more questions. The other Richard here, and I don't know whose fan was up first. The leader, I think. So.
Thank you. Richard Clare, Leader Wiltshire Council, and also the CCN spokesperson for housing. One of the biggest challenges we face under existing housing targets is the lack of infrastructure, particularly highways networks that are desperately at capacity, and then in rural areas, public transport that is, well, it's not even aspirational. With the revised housing targets we see coming, what is going to be done to join up the Department for Transport, who is very keen to talk about programmes, not so keen to deliver on them, to ensure that that highways capacity is there to enable that housing growth? Because at the moment, many of us talking to us face such serious constraints that we're limited to very small areas where that housing could go.
Hi Sharon, David
Hello.
Tutt from East Sussex. Can I start by saying I'm very pleased to see you in your current position, because I know the deep knowledge you have of the challenges that we face on a daily basis, whether they be in SEND, adult social care, or our colleagues in boroughs and districts with housing. We welcome the new funding that the government announced, but if I can refer to Richard's point regarding redistribution, I think that gives us all a nervousness. We don't simply need to redistribute the pot, and please don't make us plead poverty within our area, be that geographical or a party political or in terms of deprivation. What we really need is more funding for local government. An awful lot of councils are at breaking point, and the question of whether we're sustainable going forward is a reality.
Okay, again, two excellent questions. First of all, on the housing and infrastructure point. So I think I know the housing targets were painful to some. We have been doing a major consultation, as you'll be aware, on the National Planning Policy Framework. That will be published. We had 11,000 responses, so thank you to all those who took the time and trouble to contribute to that. I know a lot of people will have made the point about infrastructure as we go through that process. The framework will be published before Christmas, so we guarantee to have that out by the end of the year. The people in the department are beavering their way through those 11,000 responses as we speak. But it is a vital issue about how the infrastructure funding comes forward, in some cases before the housing, because we all know that it helps communities to accept housing development if they know the infrastructure is going to be in place. The work that we're doing through the Cabinet Office sort of joining up programme that's pushing forward has some main strands to it. One of them is delivering the growth we need in which housing is included, and how we make better sense of how departments work together to do that, and that includes transport infrastructure as well as other infrastructure as well. And the other one is the big switch from expensive reactive services into preventative services, and how we're going to manage that. And there will be a transition period when you have to sort of double fund in a way, because you're still going to have the reactive stuff while you put the preventative stuff in place. So please be assured that that work under the Cabinet Office banner is working very quickly to try and work on that. And just as a quick example of how that's working, one of my responsibilities is net zero. Luckily for me, the person responsible for net zero in Desnes is somebody I'd worked with quite a lot before, Minister Fambula, and we've worked very closely together on the net zero for housing issues and how we're going to work together to make that a quicker, simpler and easier process for everybody. So that's a small example, but there are much bigger examples of working across government to make that work. On your point about the funding picture for local government, of course, I've been in local government long enough to know that it's the overall situation for funding that makes the real difference. I hope the Fair Funding Review is going to make a better distribution, but look, I'm not going to make light of this. When we came into government, there was an enormous financial black hole. I know the amount's disputed, but we would still argue it was 22 billion. And my colleague, Spencer Livermore, the Minister, Treasury Minister in the Lords, spent a long debate talking about this yesterday. You know, what we need to do is get the economy growing so there's more money overall available in the system, and then we'll be able to make it easier for local government. And without that, you know, we need to stabilise, get the firm foundation to build on, and then we'll be able to look at local government. But I hope this year's settlement, which, believe me, was very hard fought around the cabinet table, and has provided some indication of what the value that local government is placed by this government. So we did get quite a lot of funding for the overall core settlement, but also for the very specific issues that we know are a real issue, like SEND.
And I would just support that view that any review has to be genuinely fair, which means that no council, it's essential that no council is worse off at the end of that review. And I know that's going to be challenging, but that is essential. We're very lucky to have you in the role that you have at MHLCG. You know, you have a deep understanding of the issues that we face here as county and unitary authorities. I'm very grateful for all you're doing. I know that you're doing to fight our cause. So can you use a big round of applause, please, for Baroness Sharon Taylor. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you.
Oh, no, I appreciate that.
We can move on.
Yeah. Right, we ready to roll? I think we are. Welcome, yeah, good to see you. Yeah, good to see you too. And we've got Nick as well. Yeah, just get Nick. Good to see you. Hi, Nick. Right. So I'm going to come straight to you, John, after I Perfect. Yeah. Right, good morning, everyone. We're a little bit behind time, so we'll just try and move on quickly to the next session. And welcome to this, where we are excited to launch our new report, The Way We Care, a new report done with Empower on children's services. There's been a bit of a theme in this conference about the big areas of pressure that we face as councils. And perhaps none is bigger than children's services. We've heard the word reform a lot during this conference. We know it's a key aim of the government as they seek to transform public services and drive economic growth. And whatever any of us thought about the budget itself, I think all of us are pleased with the fact that there was a commitment to reform children's services within the budget papers. And that's what we are going to turn to now. While we can expect further details in the spring spending review, as Baroness Taylor just mentioned, the government's commitment to reform is a lobbying success for CCN and for everybody in this room. And that's why this report is so timely. We must begin to frame the narrative on what kind of reforms we need to make the system sustainable. I don't think anybody's under any illusions about the scale of the challenge. We're increasingly operating in a market that is completely dysfunctional. With the number of children in care reaching record levels, there's been a marked increase in young people being placed in residential care due to the lack of available alternative options, and with foster care numbers plateauing. New data in this report shows that between 2019 and 2023, there's been a 45% increase in children being placed in residential placements or in supported living. And worse still, councils across England could be paying £12 billion a year on just those placements for looked after children by 2030. So we're in a false economy of increasingly paying astronomical sums for placements for children in crisis, and therefore spending less on preventative services. The report finds a system that is completely broken, with councils faced with unenviable choices when needing to place a child taken into care at short notice. If we carry on as we are, almost 10,000 extra young people could end up in care by the end of the decade, at an enormous cost both for those young people and for local taxpayers. It'll leave councils locked into a vicious circle of higher spend and poorer outcomes. But the biggest losers, of course, from this are young people themselves, with far too many children placed many miles from home at a time when they're experiencing the trauma of being removed from their family. And all the evidence shows that children who go into residential care fare much worse than their peers across education, employment and health. And it's especially troubling that a third of young people in care who had to be placed in a children's home were placed in one over 20 miles away from where they live. That's why this report needs to act as a turning point for children's services. Its recommendations for both national and local stakeholders are well worth a read, and it challenges us as councils, to think and act differently. The recommendations start with the need to reduce the number of children entering care and increase those safely leaving it. Much of this draws and builds on the work of Josh McAllister's independent review of children's social care, with which CCN engaged so successfully. Though we note the programme of change needs to be funded properly to fulfil the laudable ambition it puts forward. But this new report goes a lot further in addressing the severe challenges of commissioning and provisioning of placements, issues highlighted in the Competition and Markets Authority's 2022 report, including the knotty questions of the impact of registration and regulation on developing a sufficient supply of the right placements, the pricing regime, and the need for a much more strategic and innovative approach to commissioning. Now, all these were the subjects of a very rich debate by the advisory group that came together and which I chaired to oversee the development of the work we present to you today. I'd like to thank all those members of the advisory group for sharing their experience and expertise. It really did shape the report. I'm delighted two of its members, Nick Barnett and Brenda Farrell, are joining us this morning. Dominic Luscombe from Empower will provide more detail on the contents of the report shortly. But above all, it is clear that reform needs to be delivered quickly. We will be holding government's feet to the fire and calling for reform to be implemented within 12 months of the spending review. The government has promised to fix the foundations. It should start by fixing the foundations of children's services, and urgently. I will now hand over to Dom, who's going to set out a lot more of the details of the report. Thank you, Dom.
Thank you, Roger, for such a thorough introduction there, and good morning to you all. My name is Dominic Luscombe. I'm a director at Empower, and I lead our work on children's social care. Just to introduce myself, so I've been at Empower about 10 years, and I worked in the local government sector prior to that. So most of you will know Empower, and indeed many of you in the room will have worked with us. And for those of you that don't, we work exclusively with the public sector, and we have a focus on improving outcomes for residents, as well as reducing costs for local areas. And I'm absolutely delighted to launch this report today. I have it here with CCN colleagues. This is the product of a lot of analysis and engagement over the summer. The aim really was to better understand what's driving the challenges around care commissioning and to try and identify some potential solutions. And that's what we've done within this report. A common theme in the conversations, as you might expect, was the severity and the significance of some of the challenges that Roger referred to. Another common theme was the polarised nature of the debate. There are very different views around the drivers and the solutions to these challenges. And we have attempted in this report to strike quite a pragmatic note. We are really focusing in on what is required at a local level, at a national level, from all of the key players involved, to really focus on the root causes of these challenges. So my plan today is to share some of the key findings and recommendations from the report, and then we're going to hear from Brenda and Nick. They are both providers, and it'd be great to bring in their perspective. So where are we now? So this conference will be very familiar with the scale of the challenge, but just to recap. So in the run-up to the 2023 budget, CCN member councils projected a £380 million overspend on their children's social care budgets. and that accounted for 45% of total overspends. And that exceeded every other department, including adult social care. So going back a step, in the last 7 years, we've seen a 73% increase on expenditure on children who are looked after. And that's from 3.8 billion to 6.6 billion. And looking ahead, this report is projecting a further increase of 82% by 2930. So the case for change is very clear here. There are dire consequences of failing to reform the system, and that's what this report is calling for, with a very well discussed and developed set of recommendations over the next 18 months. So what's behind the sharp increase in costs that we've seen nationally? Well, as those of you in the room will know, many of you will be involved in this on a day-to-day basis, it's something of a perfect storm. We have more children entering and remaining in care overall, but since 2019, there's been a 45% increase in the number of children who are living in residential or semi-independent accommodation. At the same time, since 2019, we've seen a 54% increase in the average unit costs of residential care. And all of this means, of course, as you know, we have a greater proportion of expenditure on looked after children directed towards residential homes. And that is crowding out capacity for investment in early intervention, which is further compounding these challenges, and it's a vicious cycle, and one that you'll be all too familiar with. All the while, outcomes for care leavers remain stubbornly poor compared to the rest of the population. So what's driving these stark changes that we've seen to the makeup and the cost of care? So a set of interrelated factors here. I'm going to touch on several. I think first and foremost, family-based care. We don't have enough of it. As Roger referenced, the number of new foster carers has not kept up with the number of children entering care, so we've got a greater reliance on residential. This means we have a scenario where young people are often placed in residential because of the lack of alternatives, and often many miles from home, and regardless of their needs. The Josh McAllister review, which Roger also referred to, found that a third of children in residential care could be in fostering with the right. It could have been in fostering if the sufficiency challenge wasn't there. So, coming on to residential care itself, so the rapid growth in demand has outstripped supply, as we know. That's compounded scarcity and ultimately pushed price upwards. And we know as well that the Competition and Markets Authority report that Roger referred to highlighted excessive profit within the sector. That is a factor, particularly among larger providers, and something which we are addressing within this report and within its recommendations. At the same time, we're seeing entrenched barriers to entry for new providers, particularly around planning and regulation and finance, and that tends to favour larger providers, which the CMA report associated with those excessive profits. There's some real workforce challenges here. Nick and Brenda and I have spoken a lot about this. There are what we have is quite low paid work and sometimes quite limited career pathways, but versus quite a high skills required to support children with complex needs. So that means we have some significant retention and recruitment issues, which drives costs for providers and ultimately drives costs for commissioners and for local authorities. Regulation is another key factor that came through in this report. So there are lots of examples, and you'll have your own, of external providers serving notice on placements which present a threat to their regulatory position. So that is something that needs to be addressed. Similarly, in the inspection regime currently doesn't consider unplanned placement endings. We know that placements, the serving notice of placements drives so much of the cost and of the poor outcomes in the system is something that we have to address. Similarly, the current regime doesn't consider the value of provision or whether it is appropriate to need. Again, we're calling for that, for a change to the regulatory approach within Ofsted as part of this report. So another theme that came through very strongly with the advisory group, with the analysis behind this report, was that we have a limited intelligence on the needs of individual children and cohorts of children at a population level as well. And that means it's very difficult to do the sort of long-term planning and market shaping and development which we want to do and we need to do with providers. And linked to that, really, the relationship between commissioners and providers also came through as a very key theme. Now, there are some very good examples out there of local authorities working very well with providers, but what we typically see is something that is reactive, transactional, and sometimes adversarial. So relationships aren't there. Brokerage teams doing very good work, but not always with the skill or experience to manage provider relationships and hold providers to account. And what we see is quite often a focus on transactional, short-term arrangements versus the more relational, long-term market shaping that could disrupt and affect the market more positively. Finally, the other point I just wanted to pull out was the role of other services in supporting children and young people. So this is something that's very critical and sometimes I think underestimated. So we know that local authorities and health partners can often fail to agree on the appropriate multi-agency plan and support and funding for individual children and cohorts of children, and that drives a lot of cost and some real challenges within the sector. But similarly, we know that a lack of access to support for children and young people from partner agencies can also have an indirect impact. So quite a lot of examples of children struggling to access CAMS and provider ratios increasing the staffing really as a containment exercise in lieu of being able to access the support that's required for that child or young person. And critically, we know the role that education settings, education provision, exclusion and SEND can have on not only placement stability, but also placement cost. So I wanted to share a story with you now, which I think really supports and underlines some of the findings that have come through this work. So this is a story of Laura, a young person in the views of those working with her, an intelligent and mature young person, aged 13, was taken into care where she had been acting as a carer and a parent to her family. Her younger sibling was adopted at the point in which she came into care. So in the next 6 years, Laura had 22 placements. The pattern described by the social work team manager to me was providers serving notice because Laura was going out and running away from the accommodation she was in. And in many of these placements, the residential staff actually wanted her to stay, but the provider was wary of the risks involved and ultimately served notice. So in the view of the social work team manager, this pattern could have been broken if there were more attempts to look past Laura's presenting behaviour to understand and resolve the needs and trauma which were driving that behaviour, and with less risk aversion within the system. So Laura is older now and herself has 2 children in the care system. So this story is sadly a common one, but it underlines the point that these challenges require a whole system response. I mentioned at the beginning that one of the themes was that this debate can be quite polarised, and there's a lot of talk at a national level at the moment in the sector around eradication of profit, a lot of focus locally on developing in-house provision. Not to downplay either of these things, and excessive profit is something we're looking at in this report, as is targeted in-house provision. But this is not a simple challenge, and a simple solution will not suffice. Coming back to Councillor Taylor's point around blunt instruments, there needs to be an appreciation of the complexity here. So the contention of this report is that we need 4 very clear things. A very different approach to collaboration between councils, providers and key partners, including health, at a local level and at a national level and at a regional level, with a longer-term focus and a focus on providing a mixed economy of support. We need more focus on shaping the market through strategic approaches to sharing risk and sharing investment and sharing skills. We need more focus on strengths and needs versus risks and deficits, which Laura's example really underlines. And we need to better incentivise outcome improvement and needs reduction in the way in which we engage providers and commission and work with them. But of course, all of these changes require some level of change at a national policy level, and this is something which we address in the report, together with the right investment. So in response to these challenges, we've set out a series of recommendations in the report. As Roger said, some that are geared more towards local consideration and some that are geared towards national consideration. There's some more detail on this on the report, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to pull out some examples. So firstly, we're calling for a complete review of the current system for regulation of providers, with a particular focus on unplanned placement endings, excessive profit, and also consideration of value and the appropriateness of support as part of the regulatory focus. We're also calling here for a comprehensive review and reset of the current approach to attracting and supporting foster carers and kinship carers, both in-house and external foster carers, including significant investment. Now, there's a positive direction of travel on this, but we need to do more, and we need to do quickly. As we've shown here, these challenges will compound and worsen if we can't do something very differently around improving the supply of family-based care. At a local area, we recognise there are really severe challenges, but also recognise there is potentially opportunity to maximise the supply of provision through a mixed economy of longer-term strategic partnerships with providers, which might involve some market disruption, some targeted in-house provision, but ultimately as part of a mixed economy offer. One of the case studies that's featured in the report is the Somerset Homes and Horizons model, I think the Somerset colleagues in the room, that's a 10-year partnership between the council, the NHS, and a not-for-profit provider that's focused on supporting children and young people with complex needs requiring residential care. The council provide the homes for the provider to manage, with dedicated wraparound support from CAMS and the educational psychology teams. So this is an approach which I think embodies some of these principles, is having an impact. Other authorities are going in this direction. How can we learn from this? How can we replicate? How can we scale? And then we've included some recommendations in the report around how we can make better use of existing care provision. One of the assistant directors that I spoke to as part of this report said a few years ago they did an exercise where they looked at all of the children who are in care in the authority and realised that if they had every child in the right care for their needs, their sufficiency challenges would be very different and far less stark. We're calling on government to develop a national banding system which links levels and types of need with the costs of care. That is the way in which we can work against excessive cost, by focusing more on value and understanding and improving the relationship between needs and cost. We're also calling for, this is quite a significant one, but we're calling for government to establish a phased requirement for all children and young people to be cared for within their local area or region where safe and appropriate. We recognise that it will need to be phased, it will need to have leadership from regional care cooperatives, mayoral combined authorities, other regional groupings, and there's a lot of work to be done to work that through. But at a local level, we see there's an opportunity for an immediate programme of needs-led strength-based reviews of all existing care placements. That's the only way that we can identify and maximise opportunities for safe exit, step down, and changes to care and support. And one of the case studies we featured in this report was the Northamptonshire Children's Trust Circle to Success programme. It's one that we've been closely involved in, and it used child-level needs profiling to focus on the needs and strengths of over 700 children and young people. And this has allowed frontline teams to achieve positive changes for over 70 children and over 22 months, and achieved a cost reduction of over £7 million. So I'm going to bring to a close now. The challenges discussed today cannot be addressed without councils and providers working together. And with this in mind, I'm delighted to give Brenda and Nick the chance to share their reflections and perspectives. Just a couple of closing points before I hand over. This report is calling for urgent change and reform in the next 18 months. And we believe the proposals can make a difference, but they will need a renewed focus and energy from councils, providers and government. And with that in mind, as the authors of this report, ourselves and CCN really welcome the ideas and input of this audience. We will be holding a dedicated session with DCS colleagues at NCAS on the 28th of November, but please get in touch if you have specific thoughts, ideas or reflections in the meantime. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Brenda Farrell from Bernardes.
Good morning. As we've just heard, this report makes a number of recommendations in relation to fostering, which will be my focus. In my role, I oversee Bernardo's UK fostering services, which gives me an overview and insight into the fostering sector. As we know, current fostering services are struggling to meet demand. In England, 68% of children in care are looked after in foster care arrangements. During the last financial year, Ofsted data shows a net loss of 1,050 fostering households, while the number of applications received from prospective foster carers was 18% lower than it was in 2018 to 2019. And the fostering network has estimated that a further 6,000 fostering households are needed in England to ensure that children in care have the right family to meet their needs. So, how do we improve the means of finding the right foster carers to meet the needs of the children so that they are cared for to meet their needs in the right places? As highlighted in this report, we face some significant challenges, and my lens is one as a provider. We need to improve planning and forecasting. As a provider, we need to know the type of foster carers that are needed to ensure we have the right care in the right place for children. Currently, 44% of local authorities fail to publish their sufficiency strategy, and that affects planning. We need a radical approach in relation to raising public awareness of the crisis we're in fostering. We need to start a national conversation about fostering and create a public awareness campaign. We welcome record government funding and investment in foster care recruitment, but we need to scale this to a national conversation. This must include everyone, local and national government, the voluntary and independent sector, children and carers themselves. We have this collective opportunity with the development of regional hubs. And as a practitioner and a provider who's been in the market for over 30 years, we must learn from our experiences of the past. And I draw my attention to regional adoption agencies. We need investment in wraparound support services for children in care. Foster carers must not be expected to meet all children's needs themselves, and we need to invest in better mental health support for children and the other support services, such as independent visiting. We are all very mindful of the impact of COVID on children and young people, mental health, and the demands in relation to support services at the present time. In relation to commissioning, Bernardo's deliver over 600 fostering contracts across England at the present time. So we've developed a wealth of experience in the commissioning process. As I've mentioned, I've been a practitioner in the fostering sector and a manager for over 30 years. And some people in the room may remember that over 25 years ago, we did a lot of work on taking a one unified national approach to contracting in relation to fostering framework with an agreed set of outcomes. Unfortunately, over the years, with adaptation, we have resulted in different approaches and different models. More recently, the National Association of Fostering Providers, based on an understanding of the challenges and investment needed of energy and resources to respond to the commissioning environment, have worked with local authorities and providers to draw up a national fostering modelling contract. And I feel this may be something to be considered in the immediate as we move forward to find solutions. In Wales, the Health and Social Care Bill, with a focus on eliminating profit from care of looked after children, has published its Stage 1 report, and the Stage 2 process has commenced. While the Senate has published an implementation timeline for no more private registrations from April 2026 and no more non-for-profits from April 27. I'm aware that a number of local authorities are starting to express concern about projecting key sufficiency challenges as the legislation goes ahead, if not unchanged. There is learning taking place in Wales that we maybe need to consider in our movement forward to the market in England. So what works from a Bernardo's experience? I think it's important that I leave you with some positive and some vision for the future. Bernardo's, one of the largest childcare voluntary agency, charitable organisations, that fostering is only one arm of the services we provide. And as a provider, we wish to respond to the demands that you face for the children and young people needing foster placements. Within that, an example I'd like to give is a piece of work that we've done in identifying with local authorities those children which we see on a weekly basis looking for foster families. We've now taken the initiative over the last couple of years to approach commissioners and authorities and make recommendations of specialist placements we can adapt with wraparound services to meet the needs of those children and young people. And they, I am pleased to say, are having growing success in the stability and consistency for those children and young people. As we've heard in the report, collaboration, partnership is a way forward. Bernardo's have a number of strategic partnerships where we draw on all aspects of our childcare expertise and knowledge. And one is where we presently deliver in a partnership with Leicestershire Council. Here we've worked together to co-design and deliver 4 different residential settings aimed at meeting new areas identified need within areas, for example, of aged children, 16 plus, and those with emotional difficulties. And we've been able to create a programme that also brings in other aspects of our services, such as fostering. To conclude, based on the recommendations of this report, we recognise that there is no quick solution. It requires new forms of collaboration from both care providers and key partners. The child must be at the centre as we look at our systems and evidence to improve the outcomes and quality of the experience children and young people have. We must remember that our responsibility is for changing childhoods and changing lives. Thank you.
Brenda, thank you. Just before we come on to Nick, Dom's, I think, got a quick announcement on a poll.
Yes, I completely forgot about the poll, if I'm honest. So there is a in your conference app, there is, if you go to the session, there will be some questions. We'd be delighted if you could answer those in the app, and then we'll be able to share the results from that subsequently. Just, I think, 4 questions are in that app. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Now delighted to call on Nick Barnett, Managing Director of the Caldecott Foundation. Nick.
Good morning. So just a quick introduction about my career. So I've worked in residential homes for over 20 years, and I became the CEO of the Caldecott Foundation 8 years ago. The Caldecott Foundation is a not-for-profit children's charity that has 7 homes, a fostering service, primary and secondary SEMH schools, and a boarding home as well that was opened 3 years ago to work with families keeping the children at home. I want to talk about residential care and what we could do together to improve children's experiences of being in care. We all want to provide stable homes built on love. But how do we achieve this? We need to create a workforce that understands therapeutic trauma-informed approaches. A workforce that keeps hope and ambition for children that have only known despair and loss. Care delivered by providers that have strong protocols, clear models of care, high-quality assessment that informs practice. A clear roadmap of the child's journey returning back home to kinship foster care. However, some children that are thriving in residential care see it as their home and see it as family. We have one child that does not want foster care, and does not want to return home. She is thriving. She attends grammar school, has sleepovers, friends regularly visit, normal family life. The two children's homes next to each other, knock on doors, have barbecues and share time together as you would with your neighbours, all because of the above has been achieved. In 2018, though, we had a good look at ourselves because we wasn't getting it right at that time, and we needed to improve what we were providing as a service. So we developed our own relational model of care, invested in training and developed therapeutic workshops, provided clear assessment, which resulted in further stability for the children. We believe that high-quality assessment of mental health, education, emotional needs is required for complex placements, followed by therapeutic placement plans that are supported by safety plans, not risk assessments. If there's disruption or placement is struggling, we need to improve the sharing of risk at that time. Placements end due to fear of regulatory performance, as what has been well documented, and the potential of what the placement authority will do if the home loses the outstanding or good. Some local authorities won't place in homes which are required improvement, even though that might be the right home. We need to create crisis support packages to help placement stability. Local authorities have their own clinical team to support guide teams through difficult patches. Providers should have their own protocols ready for such scenarios also. Since we implemented the model of care, improved assessments, introduced the workshops in therapeutic work, we have reduced the missing from care and incidents where the police were involved by over 90%, receiving the Howard League Reform Award. We do have placement disruptions. At the moment, we have 2 children on notice. The one local authority received the notice because I wanted them around the table to make sure they didn't leave what we were doing with this child, because this child was in crisis. Both notices have gone over 18 months now, and we're working with the local authorities. I believe that the one placement will be sustained, but the other one will need to move on to somewhere which is of high intensity 2-to-1 placement because of the safety needs. Young people that have moved home to foster care, 16 plus, are kept in touch by us and welcomed back to reunions. One of the current trustees lived at Caldicott as a child and was supported through his early childhood traumas into a confident, successful adult that he is now. We need to start a pathway planning at 14. Lots of placements get to 16, then at times, which is too late for planning, and then the care cliff comes quick. We need to get this better, all of us. Ofsted needs to remove the one-word rating, in my opinion. This will remove the anxiety that RMs have on every inspection. Our efforts should be for improving the experiences of living in care, providing happy memories, providing unconditional love without the fear of an inspection, one-word judgment that apparently captures the overall experience of the children. To conclude, let's carry on working together, sharing responsibility, being more resilient, and sharing risks. Value our workforce and improve the knowledge and training of our staff. We need to create an environment which is inclusive, child-focused and sustainable, with care packages which are needs-led. We need to provide value for placements, but most importantly, we need to create value for the social workers, home managers and the staff that are doing extraordinary work today. Thank you.
Did you say about the home or at the end? Okay. Right, thank you. Now, the clock's running inexorably down, but we have about 7-8 minutes, so time for a few questions. Can we keep them relatively brief, and I'll run them past the panel. I'll take 2 or 3 to start with. Right, there's a question there, and then Peter.
Thank you. There are circa 100,000 children in care nationally and roughly 90,000 people in our prison system. That very close correlation in numbers is depressingly a reality for when you look at that prison population. What more should be done at an earlier stage to prevent them entering the criminal justice system? And my second point is that all of us as councillors here are corporate parents and we take our responsibilities very seriously. But we do find the budget pressures on things like securing Tier 4 beds, when we're asked to be bidding £30,000 a week for a Tier 4 bed, if we can get it,
completely unacceptable. What more can be done to address that?
Thank you. And can I take Peter as well? We hold those thoughts at the moment on the criminal justice system and Tier 4 beds. Peter.
Thanks. Thanks for the report. It does fit in with what we see. Sorry, Peter Thornton, Cabinet Member at West London Furnace. I just want to challenge the figures a little bit, the graph. There appears to be an assumption it's just going to carry on going up and up forever almost. But is not some of this a hangover from COVID? And if it is, should we not be expecting the figures to come down? And should we not be planning for that? And also, we're told that the birth rate is dropping significantly. How does that feed into the future? And I suppose linked to those, I mean, why is this happening? If it's not COVID, what's happening here? We just seem to be accepting we need to cope with it. But as the previous speaker said, should we be looking to try and stop more going into the system?
Thank you. Well, Dom, particularly on that second question from Peter, if I come to you on that first, and then we'll run through all members of the panel in terms of all the questions that were raised.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So just in terms of the point around the graph, so we have the assumptions go back further than COVID. So we have tried to take that into account and use trend analysis to project forward. Obviously, forward projections are always, there are always assumptions that underpin them, and there's debate around that. But we have tried to take account of COVID within that. I think in terms of the why we're seeing that part of the question, I think that, I mean, others will have views. We know obviously austerity has been a factor. We know that we are seeing deprivation in communities, and that is translating in terms of children entering care. I think the early intervention and prevention support in many localities has been reduced or affected over the years. And we know, as we've sort of talked about here, that we've got children tend to stay in care for longer, and ultimately the skew towards residential is directly a result of not having the level of family-based care that we need. But I think the thrust of the report is we need to follow through on the Josh McAllister call for 2.6 billion in family help. There needs to be significant investment in early help. That's the only way that we can address this. But similarly, you saw for that example of Laura, that actually, and Nick and Brenda have given me similar examples, the effective placement breakdown and multiple placement breakdown is so significant here. And actually, we miss opportunities at that stage to put in place the right support that could prevent and mitigate that. And I think often those Tier 4 beds, they might start where Laura did. You know, it's partly the system that's driving that impact over time with the way that we're working.
Thank you. Now I'm going to take Brenda and then Nick, then we'll come back to you, Dom, for the results of the poll, and I think that's where we're going to have to draw a line. So, Brenda.
Just to the point about the criminal justice system and how we mitigate about children as adults needing or ending up in that position. Bernardo's have been doing a number of pieces of work, collaboration with a number of other charities, looking at the impact of poverty. And as Dom has pointed out, it is about early intervention. It is about helping children and young people, whether pre-care coming into care, to maintain attachment and stability in their lives and being identified as part of a community or a family or a care environment in which they can be sustained. And also about that is looking at the question, Peter, about post-COVID. If you look at the fostering statistics and children coming into care, one of the primary issues is about resilience. It is about helping members of the public to believe that they have the ability to come now and care for children. And it's about resilience in both areas. It is about having the emotional health and well-being services from our parts to make sure that we are providing foster carers that have that skill and competence and resilience to care for those children, as well as understanding the impact of poverty and the impact of COVID on children's mental health. So it doesn't have to be complicated. I think it's like everything. If we can break them down and each of us look at what needs to change at each stage, and we know the research tells us quite thoroughly about the impact for children coming out of such trauma, about what needs to be done to assist them, we can work on this and we can look to change that cycle, as you've pointed out. I am hopeful, and I'm starting to see the numbers of members of the public inquiring about fostering gradually starting to increase. And I think that's the momentum we want to be able to move forward after today.
Thank you. And Nick.
For me, I think earlier assessment needs to be put in place, high quality assessment by the local authorities and also the providers. We know that children that have experienced trauma, when they hit the age of 15, 16, they like to vote with their feet. Teenage behaviours that we have at home with our own kids are exasperated and exaggerated by some of the children in care. What we need to do is build a resilient workforce that understand that piece of work. It is a bespoke piece of work, and we need to make sure that the workforce are trauma-informed so that the children don't have these placement breakdowns. And when we get to those disruptions or those placement breakdowns or potential breakdowns, we need to all sit around the table and take responsibility. And I think sharing risk is really key in what we do going forward.
Nick, thank you very much. Now, Dom, I think you're just going to share the results of the poll.
Yes, I'm looking to James here. I'm hoping we can share the results on the screen. Possible. Failing that, we will be able to share them, circulate them after this session. James in the room? No, that's fine. So we'll share the results from the poll subsequently after this session, and we do have a limited number of copies of the report, so please come up to us and grab one if you would like to grab a copy.
Great, thank you. I think we have to draw this now to a close, but can I thank Dom for all your work on this, and I think this is a really important piece of work and one we're very, very pleased and proud to be launching this morning. And both Brenda and Nick, thank you both for giving your time, for coming this morning, but also for your part in the advisory group. As I think I said earlier on, it was a really, really high quality set of discussions, and I think that helped again make all this work a still stronger contribution to what is going to remain a really important debate. So we'll close it there, but thank you all very much, and we will launch the report.
Yeah, okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we're running over, so if you can quieten down and we'll make a start on the next session. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, colleagues. I'm Councillor Julian German. I'm your Vice Chair. I'm your rural spokesperson. As you saw last night, I'm also a board member of local partnerships. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning, and even more so to introduce Andy Haldane, currently Chief Executive of the Royal Society of Arts, Manufacture and Commerce. I think the full title is important. Formerly Chief Economist of the Bank of England, a fantastic CV. I'm not going to run through it. It's there in the conference programme. We're here to hear from Andy, so let's do that without any further ado. Andy, thank you.
I'm going to hop over here. Morning, everyone. Love to see you all. About 8:30, I wasn't sure I'd get here, actually. I had to phone in my homework from Paddington, but I was bailed out by the Elizabeth line. Who knew? A big infrastructure project that saves efficiencies, right? Miraculous. Thank you, Julian, for that kind introduction. I thought what I might do is offer up front just one or two perspectives, not new ones, I imagine, to many of you, from a more macroeconomic perspective. I'm not remotely the expert that you are on the details at the local level, but I'm sure we'll get onto those. And I hope my comments might be the prompt for a conversation in the room about where we go next on growth, and on local growth in particular. The timing of this event couldn't be better. We still have a new or newish government, of course. We still await a devolution white paper. I believe Will said a few words about that this morning, suitably cryptic, I hope. And of course, we still have lots of local places themselves finding their way. So the timing is great to think about what next, and indeed how quickly we might go about the one next. I think the jumping off point then needs to be the new government and the new government's missions, of which, as you all know, there are 5. Primus inter pares among those missions, unquestionably, and every minister worth their salt will tell you this, is of course the growth mission. We also know that we're still waiting, really, for the details of a concrete plan for making good on that growth mission. We had an indication of that in the budget, a down payment on that in the budget. We'll find out more, doubtless, next year in the spending review, which will be a more important moment, actually, for crafting the contours of that national growth plan. But I think even now, I can make the following statement with absolute certainty, and I hope with a degree of clarity. And that is that there is no hope of that national growth mission being met if it is not done from the bottom up. In other words, without a set of well-designed and purposefully delivered local growth plans, there is not a hope in hell of that national growth mission, the singular mission of this government being met. Another way of putting that point is that we all know about, and you live it on a daily basis, the acute inequalities and inequities that exist across every part of the UK. Those are long-standing, those are deep-seated. But the flip side of those inequalities and inequities are, of course, huge amounts of latent potential, huge amounts of latent growth energy that could and should be unlocked. I'd go as far as to say that unless and until the latent energy in the poorer parts of the UK is unlocked, we will not make good on that national growth mission. And to be clear, when I talk about the less well-performing parts of the UK, that does not divide up along the lines, the shorthand lines that are often used by our glorious media and our politicians. The divides there are not north-south. They are not cities versus towns versus rural. They are not, when I think about the north-south, the divides east-west in the UK are often as large as the divides north-south. The divides between cities are often larger than the divides between cities, towns, villages, and more rural parts. We find pockets of deprivation, we find pockets of low income, and therefore we also find pockets of latent potential across all parts of the UK. And that means for me, if we are to have a hope of meeting that national growth mission, that and potential needs to be unlocked across every part of the UK, all points of the compass, rural and urban. And of course, that's why this network, CCN network in particular, is of importance, given that you speak, I think, to about half the population and about 40% of UK GVA. So it's all about the local, if it's all about local growth plans, what then are the core ingredients, the prerequisites of a purposeful local growth plans? Well, it is, again, familiar to everyone in this room, the holy trinity of powers, money, and people or resources. Without those three core ingredients, very hard to see how local potential can be unlocked. And starting optimistically, if I look to those three aspects, we have seen, have we not, a degree of progress on all three fronts over the last decade or so, in particular, of course, among the growing set of mayoral combined authorities. Those are growing in number, as you all know. They are being given an extending set of powers under the previous government and under the new one, including most recently, of course, the trailblazer deals, initially for the West Midlands and Greater Manchester, are now extending their reach to some, but not all, mayoral combined authorities. We have the very welcome move among, again, a subset of those MCAs of a single financial settlement model, removing, I think, what Angela Rayner called the Hunger Games among those that take part, and offering a welcome degree of extra fungibility and flexibility to financing, and indeed, hopefully, a lessening of the deadweight bureaucratic overhead of bidding for monies. We find those MCAs being the home to a large and widening set of both free ports and investment zones, which will, it is hoped, in the fullness of time, then align with the new government's industrial strategy, on which we saw a green paper produced, quite a green paper, very green even for a green paper, a couple of weeks ago. We have seen those mayoral combined authorities as MCAs asked to produce local growth plans as the catalyst for some strategic choices in those places, again aligning with the industrial strategy. It is hoped. Suffice to say, it's still early stages in many places for those local growth plans, but at least they contain the kernel of something that's absolutely necessary. That's all the good news. Let's do a bit of bad. Being an economist, well, I mean, we do know, and you all know, only too well, that those even expanded set of MCAs still only cover around half of the English population, and a bit more than half, therefore, of its GVA. That is plainly a gap. Equally, for those non-MCA regions, of course, represented disproportionately in the room today, we know that many of those essential prerequisites of unlocking local growth, that holy trinity of powers, people, and money, either are not in place or are not in place on a sufficient scale to unlock that potential. Outside the MCAs, there are currently at least no local growth plans being hatched. When it comes to powers, they are plainly materially weaker than among the MCAs, and in some cases close to non-existence. There's no talk yet of single financial settlements for non-MCAs. The investment zones and free ports are thin on the ground outside of the MCAs. In other words, among that half of the English population, most of what I said were the essential prerequisites for unlocking local growth simply are not there at present. Perhaps salvation will come with Will's devolution white paper. We shall see. But suffice to say, as things stand, would you have confidence that the UK's national growth mission could be made good on when half of the English population does not have the essential preconditions for a local growth plan? No. You'd be pessimistic about that. Or putting it more optimistically, unless those conditions are put in place, it's hard to see how that national growth mission could and should be met. So to finish off, Julian, what I thought I might do is just speculate a bit, sort of Andy's wish list of things we might wish to see in that devolution white paper that could fill some of the gaps, clear, substantive policy gaps that plainly exist if both local and national growth missions, the two being symbiotically linked, are to be met. And this is a plainly non-exhaustive list, but in the spirit of stirring and prompting a bit of conversation in the room. And hopefully disagreement, actually. Firstly, plainly, we need to have a framework for completing the map, completing the devolution map in a way that currently does not really exist. On that, all I would suggest was a couple of points. One, don't wait for government, right? Self-initiated action in this room is overwhelmingly the right approach, forming your own view of what makes sense. There's a temptation of long-standing to wait from missives from Whitehall to make stuff happen. But the essence of devolution is to flip that presumption, to flip that power presumption. And in terms of that self-initiated change, I do think if local growth plans are to be coherent, they need to be defined over a coherent economic geography. So just setting for one side the administrative geography of the UK, which is obviously complicated, as you all know better than me. The basis for those local growth plans, though, need to be a defined economic geography. Case in point, when a few years ago, as you'll all remember, the previous incarnation of industrial strategy at the local level was initiated by the LEPs. And a lot of the LEPs did great work, and that was to be lauded. But equally, having 38 or 39 of those local industrial strategies was far too many. They were not sensible economic geographies, and therefore those local industrial strategies themselves often made little sense. And that's a lesson we should learn when we think about the next stage of this when completing the map. If these are not sensible economic geographies, then that's a poor basis for a conversation about local growth plans. On devolution, where I think, again, we are at risk of setting the bar far too low. Right now, it looks like the approach, even the new government, will be to set fixed timetables for the decentralisation, devolution of powers, both for MCAs and prospectively for non-MCAs. And that, for me, makes absolutely no sense at all. That the most powerful set of incentives to crack on will be to set thresholds that are based on circumstances, not fixed timelines. So when people are ready for a trailblazer, they've satisfied the preconditions, they get a trailblazer. They don't have to hang around and wait for year upon year for the admin timetable to have run its course. We want everyone to be blazing a trail as quickly as possible. And that calls for a different approach for setting timelines for Devo deals. As for Devo itself, it looks like, I hope I'm wrong about this, but it looks like what we'll get is a similar fixed menu approach to that of the previous government. An expanded fixed menu with more things on it, but nonetheless that local areas are asked to pick what they would like from the fixed menu of extra powers. 2 points on that. One, that is at odds with Gordon Brown's report for this government on the shape devolution should take. His suggestion was that the power presumption should shift towards local areas. Instead of them being offered a fixed menu, it should instead be a la carte. In other words, the powers you get at the local level spring from your own local growth plan. The question is, what powers are needed to make good on the local growth plan? And then the presumption is put back onto government. Why would you not grant those powers at the local level if you wish the local growth plan to be put in place? That power shift, that presumptive power shift in the approach to Devo, I hope can find a home in the white paper that comes. Just finally, Julian, before we go to the floor, I think we do need to look afresh at the statutory objectives that are set for local government. They are currently too narrow, in my view, if local leaders are to weigh appropriately the plural dimensions to the health of a place, economic, social, and environmental. We plainly need to look afresh at local government funding formulae, which are at best out of date and at worst not remotely fit for purpose in attuning monies to local needs. We need to look, although it's a step forward, to have a council of regions and nations, as this new government has put in place. It's plainly silly to have one where half of the English population is not currently represented. That too needs a rethink and a refresh if we are serious about the thing we all used to call levelling up. And finally, the key role of anchor institutions. Of course, there are many of such anchors. Local government is one. Local business is another. The many and various pillars of civil society are a third. A fourth would be FE and HE, colleges and universities. As you all know, many of them are currently in a rather fragile state. That needs remediating. Hard to see how local areas thrive unless those fragilities are remediated. And alongside that, we should also ask ourselves the question, do we have that academic infrastructure, HE and FE, in all the places we need? Are the ways of completing the map, adding micro-universities in places that are currently poorly served by them, adding technical colleges in places where they don't currently exist, as a further anchor to local growth? My friend Jesse Norman often talks to me about the Enmite micro-university in Hereford that he set up as an example of what might be done in a place otherwise ill-served from an HE and FE perspective. That might do, Julian, I hope, to kick off a conversation. Despite all that, and despite me being an economist and therefore sort of genetically gloomy, I'm actually strangely optimistic about the UK. For the same reason I've always been optimistic about the UK, which is that in my previous life at the Bank of England, I spent around 10 years of my life basically walking around, not actually walking, although when the trains weren't working, I often was walking around the UK, visiting places almost everywhere I could get to, really, cities, towns and villages, largely to learn about the economy, but also partly to cheer myself up. And I always came back cheered up, actually, because there are pockets of brilliant businesses, brilliant institutions, brilliant people, the length and breadth of the UK. They exist. They absolutely exist. I've spoken to them. I know they exist. I do think if we got behind a fully throated, comprehensive, bold national growth plan, rooted in a set of bold and ambitious local growth plans, those clusters could be grown into superclusters, and that national growth mission can be met. That will be all power to your elbow, and will be just what the government needs with its central mission. So on that, we'll definitely finish, as I won't get any more optimistic than that, Julian.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy. I just wanted to start, before I take questions, by reflecting on what we've heard yesterday and today. So Baroness Taylor this morning very much saying the same about the government's growth agenda. And in Will's session, we heard a discussion about, well, perhaps we should be talking about the powers akin to the Welsh Assembly. We should be looking up for those policy levers rather than what is in effect, and compared to many high-performing economies, very low levels of devolution, even those that have been proposed. So if there was any more detail around what those levers are that you think are important to growth. You also touched on size, and obviously we're the County Council's network. You said 38, 39 laps, far too many. So is there, in your view, a minimum size? And we're focused on what's happening in our country here and now. This might just be a question to leave hanging, but I think you've probably got some views on Trumponomics as well, and sort of, you know, the impact that might have on our economy. But you might just want to leave that one to one side. And I'll look for some hands while you make a start. Thank you. Good. Yeah.
Let me have a go at two of those. On the first, yeah, I mean, it's been a positive but rather grudging and mealy-mouthed approach to devolution so far that leaves us kind of still way off where any other Western economy is in terms of decentralization of powers, over spending, but in particular over taxation. Yeah. So it's faintly mad to be devolving adult skills without thinking about devolution of education. I mean, that is a journey, needs to be joined up. Delegating or decentralizing one part of the runway and not the other part of the runway, I think is of limited utility or usefulness. So, of course, we need a more... often this is so much led by, Whitehall instinct of some departments rather than any... The reason I want to flip the presumption is it needs to flow from your local growth plan, not from the fact that the DfE fancies hanging on. That's a mad approach to devolution. On tax, we've scarcely got started on that, and absolutely need to, and whether that starts with, I don't know, tourist and hotel tax and picks up pace from there, that might be a useful place to commence the conversation. But it strikes me we need to start commencing that conversation. Otherwise, I think the balance of incentives are really kind of wonky. I'm definitely not going to opine on how we draw the map, but all I would say is if you look at the economic evidence, and of course this is only one bit of the evidence, you find that the real benefits of size and scale of what's sometimes called agglomeration kick in north of 1 million, right? Hard to find much below 1 million. And actually say the real sweet spot is 1 million to 5 million. Now, I know that, I don't say that as a sort of count of despair for those that are below that, but that is what the evidence points towards in terms of when those coalition of forces come together in a way that's it's a rocket booster to growth. I also think, by the way, this is a slight sidebar comment, that even thinking in terms of the MCAs can be too narrow. Some of what I'm working on right now with some MCAs are actually pan-regional initiatives and pan-national initiatives. Working on one, which is about could we turn the whole of the East Coast into a corridor from Dundee right down to the Thames, with a huge power source offshore, with a fantastic network of ports that runs down the whole of the East Coast, and with East Coast Main Line as the inshore communication. So why not? Why not? We're working on a east to west, that's north to south, working on east to west pan-regional creative corridor, one creative north running east to west coast. So these are some of the contours we should be thinking about. On Trump, what to say in a non-job threatening way? Well, I'll repeat, I was on Koonsberg the other Sunday, ahead of the budget and ahead of the US election, where I said I thought Donald Trump was a far more grave threat to UK mortgage rates than was Rachel in her budget. And I absolutely stand by that judgment. Now I think that's probably already true and probably become more true in the fullness of time. The world, and this is not a party political point, remotely, but the world does not need less trade, higher inflation, lower growth, and higher interest rates. It really doesn't. The US doesn't, and neither do we. And if that's what the Trump policy recipe is, I think we'll all be the poorer for it.
Very good, thank you. So I'm aware of time. Gentlemen at the back, if we can take, there's the two ladies towards the front, if we can take those three, and then I'll take three on the other side. Thank you.
Richard Smith from Suffolk. And interesting, your last comment, really, about the East Coast. We'll join you in that joined-up partnership.
Thank you.
I'm a long-standing fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, and I just want to pay tribute to you as the relatively recent chief executive and the good work you're doing after a number of eccentric years, let me just put it like that. No, that's not what my question is. You're a very distinguished economist, and we want to take advantage of having you in this room to this cross-party audience. What is your view, please, on the supposed £22 billion black hole?
Oh, gracious.
Would you like to stand up? And yeah. We'll just do the three.
Thank you. Lucy Netzinger, leader of Cambridgeshire County Council. Cambridgeshire has been one of the areas of the country which has actually had really impressive growth over the last 20 years and really impressive house building. We've been doing all the things that government want us to do. With that growth comes a massive pressure on public services because government funding doesn't keep up with the pace of our population growth. And it's quite hard to justify to our population why we should have more growth if all they see is ever fuller schools, hospitals, more and more pressure on their public services. So can you give a little bit of an indication about how we can make sure that the benefits of growth that the Treasury are so keen to see are also recognised by the people who live in the places where it's going to happen? Because I don't think we've been very good at getting that message across. And I'm going to also abuse my position with the microphone to say I 100% agree with you on education, and just devolving adult skills won't touch the sides. We have to devolve more of it. Thank you.
And, yeah. Thank you. Adele Gritton, Chief Executive of Local Partnerships. It's going back to your dining analogy, Andy, and the a la carte versus the bespoke menu, for want of a better word, or bespoke menu versus the fixed menu. We're an entity that's owned by Treasury, by the Welsh Government and by the LGA. I can see how the central government ecosystem is very well geared and set up to deliver the fixed menu, but it is not yet geared up to deliver the a la carte. So I'd be interested in your thoughts as to how that could work centrally when you have a vegan menu, a gluten-free menu, a full-fat menu and a dairy menu at the table. Just how is that going to work?
Thank you, everyone. Okay. Very, very good. Should we have a go? Well, I do them in reverse order, so I can try and think of an answer to the 22 billion question by the end. Well, I mean, for that more flexible, expansive approach for Devo to work, you need all of Whitehall to be playing nicely, which is much easier said than it is done. We do, though, now, with the new government, have a new piece of machinery of government in the form of the mission boards, which are meant to bring together the Whitehall departments around a common cause. We have one for growth, we have one for opportunity, and what have you. If I'm right, parentheses, and I am, that you can't get national growth without local growth, and you can't get local growth without local powers. That would be a machinery of government that would enable this sort of conversation to be less difficult than it has been in the past. There are some logical steps in what I've said that others would need to accept. But I think, I mean, the case for me is fairly black and white, that without those things in place, it's hard to see how we get growth going, how we get our economy growing. So I would hope that might be a way of cutting through what historically, I agree, has been an absolute thicket of bureaucratic obfuscation. On Cambridgeshire, not in the same way you do, but I feel your pain. I was up there to speak at a dinner in Cambridge a couple of weeks ago now. It took me, you would recognise this, it took me as long to get by taxi from the train station to King's College as it did to get from London to Cambridge. I mean, I could have walked there twice as quick as it turns out, but, you know, I just sat there like some idiot with the clock ticking over. And having friends there, I know about the public services, housing, water. I think yesterday, water shortages in Cambridge, someone was telling me yesterday. And you are surely right that unless this touches the lived experience of people who live in these places, for all the talk of it being a gold rush and a boomtown, which in Cambridge's case is plainly true, it will fall on the deafest of ears. To be honest, this was among the reasons why I had a rather more positive take on the budget than many other people. Because without an investment in our public services, I mean, I heard from many people, this is an anti-business budget. But look, if businesses can't get people because they're sick, if they can't get people because the skills don't exist, if those people can't get to work, then that's bad for business, right? So investing in health, in education, in transport strikes me as about as pro-business as you can possibly get. Now, of course, that comes at a cost, and business will bear some of the cost, as will workers. But what's the alternative? Not investing in those things, and therefore having an even worse environment for doing business. And what's true of business, I think, is true at the place-based level as well. And I hope, among other things, a rethink both of the statutory obligations of local government and of the funding of those public services would be at least part of the route to meeting the challenge, I think, that you rightly make. And as you know, is as true of parts outside Cambridge as it is true of Cambridge. Are we out of time now?
Well, you did say you've
talking
got a
down the
stop
clock.
At 5 past, Andy. So.
Well, listen, on this, I mean, ahead of the budget, I was critical of us needing to talk in terms of black holes with numerical amounts attached to them. The thing about black holes is they suck out energy and light. And the talk of the fiscal black hole did suck a degree of energy and light out of the UK economy. You see that in measures of consumer confidence, business confidence, and what have you. Whatever the rights and wrongs of, was it 22 billion or was it not 22 billion? The truth is now, whatever size of the hole, it has now been plugged through a combination of extra borrowing to the tune of about 30 billion and extra taxes to the tune of about 40 billion. And we move on. For me, as I mentioned up there very briefly, the budget was important. But for those in this room, even more important will be next year's multi-year spending review. This will set the colour and the tone of this government and those within local government delivering on that. From what it's worth, Julian, I do think in that spending review, we need to see at least a couple of things, both of which I think were at best sotto voce in the budget. And the one is a much clearer blueprint for public service reform, as well as public service money. So we aren't in ever greater sucking sound territory. I don't just mean health, but of course that does need to include health. And secondly, we do need that kernel of a big and bold approach to growth that deviates from where we have been in the past. It is, as we all know, the very definition of madness to keep on doing the same thing and to expect a different outcome. So we need a different plan, a bold plan, ambitious plan, one rooted in business and rooted in locality to make good on that growth mission. I hope that the spring statement can bring some of both of those things to make good on that optimism, which I know I feel, I sense that you all feel, too, at least to a degree in your local places.
Thank you very much, Andy. You did say that you've got another appointment to get onto, so unless I can push it, I'm going to thank you. You're not giving me a nod, so I don't think I can.
I'd like to take one more question, as long as it's really easy. Or not.
No? Are we happy? Is coffee? Oh no, look, there's one at the back. Oh, it's the LG, is it? LGC?
Tempting fate.
Hi, Kirsty Weekly from LGC. Might not be as quick as you hoped, but...
My taxi's waiting, by the way, so no pressure.
Could you expand a little bit on what you mean by a review of statutory obligations for local authorities? Is that adding to the list of things that are statutory, or taking away from it and giving more flexibility?
It's adding to, and in the interest of time, we did last year, working with Core Cities, a report on urban futures, although many of the messages apply rurally as well as urban. One of the recommendations on there was to looking again at the statutory ones, to expand them to what I sometimes call the kind of triple helix model of local regeneration. which is the weighing of the economic, the social and environmental as one. And that was the spirit of my suggestion around that. But the detail is in the report that I can send on to you and point you towards.
Great. Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you very much for your insight. I'm sure that will give us all food for thought, and we really appreciate you being with us. Thank you for your time.